Hello and welcome to the fourth of our Governance Health Check Wednesday workshops brought to you by the Development Governance Group. My name is Denise Copeland, Governance and Charity Advice Manager in NICFA, and I also provide Joint Secretariat to the Development Governance Group. And I'd like to introduce you to two fellow members of the Development Governance Group, Conor Shields from Community Arts Partnership and Marie Gilmore from Advice NI. And Marie and Conor will be leading us through the presentation, giving you plenty of tips on how to review your governance. So before I hand over to Marie and Conor, I'd first like to tell you a little about the Development Governance Group that is responsible for the Code of Good Governance in Northern Ireland. The group was formed in 2006 with the specific mandate to develop a set of standards for governance in the sector and so produce the first Code of Good Governance in 2008. Currently, there are 12 representatives from various sector support organisations, all of which have a particular governance focus within their own membership or subsector. You will recognise most of the members on the screen here, and NICFA and Volunteer Now are the joint secretariat for the group. So over to Marie now, who is going to tell us about the third edition of the Code of Good Governance.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start by giving a little background information on the Code of Good Governance. So the third edition of the Code was launched in 2021, and since then it's been reviewed and revised a few times. So the Code itself sets out the principles and key elements of good governance in an organisation as a whole, as well as some recommended good practice. And it's closely linked to regulatory responsibilities. So whilst the Code of Good Governance is not mandatory, it's important to highlight that it's heavily endorsed and recognised by the Charity Commission Northern Ireland. So you'll see here on the screen the list of all the 5 principles. The first being understanding its function in delivering organisational purpose. The second is working as an effective team. The third, maintaining control, making effective decisions and managing risk. Fourth is acting with integrity. And the fifth, being open and accountable. So for today's presentation, our focus is going to be on Principle 4, acting with integrity. So who's the Code of Governance for? It's for all organisations in the voluntary and community sector, for example, charities, not-for-profit organisations, and sports and faith-based organisations. It really is applicable to anyone who runs or governs a particular group or sector. And it's important before we get into the finer detail of the code, just to provide clarity on some of the terms used. So within our organisation, many of us would use different names for the governing body. So you could have several names for your governing body, which you can see on the screen, such as trustees or board or management committee or directors or governors, vestry, Kirk session, governance board, elders. So the Charity Commission itself refers to the governing body as the charity trustees. You'll see in the Code of Good Governance that we use the generic term board for the governing body. We also use the term board and or management committee in the Governance Health Check and on the DIY Committee Guide website. So these terms are quite interchangeable, but it's good just to clarify that different organisations may refer to them in different ways. Board members hold a position of trust, and with that comes legal and moral responsibilities. So the code and its resources are designed to support you as board members to meet those responsibilities and to meet the needs and expectations of your beneficiaries. We have some complementary resources, and you can see on the screen that a boardroom poster has been designed, and this can be popped up in the place where your committee or board meets to act as a good reminder for that Code of Good Governance. And we've also printed the code in booklet format, one for every trustee in Northern Ireland. It's a great small booklet that trustees can refer to at any time they need to, and it can be collected from any of the development governance groups or other networks. We also have the Governance Health Check and the DIY Committee Guide, which we're going to look at in more detail today. The Governance Health Check reviews current systems and processes and helps organizations understand areas where they may be doing really well or where they may be falling a little short. It covers areas such as protection for individual members and for the board as a whole, identifies gaps and addresses or mitigate against risks, verification of the relevance and robustness of your current systems and processes, the protection of services, an opportunity to increase stakeholder confidence, and helps you comply with charity and other regulations. So the online resource, www.diycommitteeguide.org, which is set out in line with the principles of the code. This online resource and the materials that are on this site provide practical support for trustees and make it easier for the information needed. The Governance Health Check then is a self-assessment questionnaire, which has also been created by the Development Governance Group as a practical resource to assist committees and boards to work towards adhering to the principles of the code. So this health check should help committees of any size to assess their governance and identify those areas where improvement might be needed, and demonstrate their good governance practices to their stakeholders and beneficiaries and funders alike. It goes through each principle individually and has a sliding scale to help you answer each question, which is fully met, partially met, or not met. The Governance Health Check is pre-populated with suggested evidence, but as all organisations are very different, what makes good governance practice for one may be different for another. So common sense and proportionality, I think, is the key process in this. The area for your evidence shows you how to reflect on what you've met and what you've partially met or not met in each of those areas. And importantly, each section will have an action plan attached to it, and you can populate that with any action points that are raised throughout your checks. I would say just when completing the health check, to allow yourselves time to complete it. It's an internal document, so be as honest as you can and critical in each area. You'll get the best results that way. No one can ask you for it, but it's good to promote it, that you're on that journey to completing it. And I'll now pass over to Connor, who will take you through the next few slides.
Thanks, Marie. We're going to go through Principle 4 in detail, showing you how to use the Governance Health Check and the DIY Committee Guide to help you and your organisation adhere to the code. Ultimately, though, you shouldn't try to do all this in one go. So we've tried to break down the process by principle to aid understanding, because it is a bit of a journey. We've provided a roadmap to assist you to reflect and review your progress on an ongoing basis. And as Marie said earlier, just a quick reminder that we use language interchangeably. So if you refer to yourselves as the committee, then we may use the term board when we're referring to you. So Principle 4, acting with integrity. So the board must act with honesty and in the best interests of the organisation and its beneficiaries at all times. This sets the tone for values, ethics, culture, and ensures that these guide the performance and the engagement with stakeholders. As a board, you should uphold the highest ethical standards, recognize and manage conflicts of interest and or loyalty And within all these areas outlined in the Code of Governance, these are the key aspects. So independence of decision making, having a code of conduct in place, promoting equality, diversity, inclusion, and good relations, ensuring inclusive, accessible participation, meeting safeguarding duties, and fostering a safe, respectful culture in your organization.
So as you can see by the slide on the screen, this is what the health check framework looks like. You will see each section will have the relevant principle heading on the left-hand side. The next three columns are for you to indicate where you have fully met, not met, partially met, the evidence in each of those sections. And the fifth column on the right-hand side titled Our Evidence is where you can populate what evidence your organization has already in place. For an example, a policy for out-of-pocket expenses. And then this final column on the right-hand side is the health check, which you'll see has been pre-populated with some examples of potential suggested evidence. We've highlighted two of those questions today. The first, do you have procedures in place to deal with gifts and hospitality? So the evidence you could be looking at for this would be a gifts and hospitality policy, perhaps a database where you keep a record of those, and make sure that's sort of disseminated across all the service, all your organization know about it. The second would be, has your board discussed the ethics of receiving sponsorship or funding? And again, evidence of this could be held in your mission or vision or values. It could also be in your charitable purposes or any HMRC guidance you have, or you may have an ethical funding policy. So I'll hand you over to Connor for the next section. We're going to carry out a short poll.
Thanks, Marie. Yes, we are going to have a quick poll. So you can see that we have 4 questions. I'll just run through them quickly. Do you have an ethical funding policy? So that's having a written policy that sets out what kinds of funding you will or you will not accept. For example, sources that conflict with your mission or your values. And an ethical funding policy helps protect the organization's reputation. Question 2 in the poll is, do your trustees consider the ethical stance of receiving funds from potential funders? So trustees should actively weigh up whether taking money from a source could compromise independence, create reputational risk, or conflict with values. Question 3 looks at conflict of interest policy. A clear policy makes sure trustees and staff that the organization's interests first, not professional or personal ones. And the final question on the poll asks, do you have a register of interests to help you identify potential conflicts of interest? Keeping a simple register of trustees and senior staff's external roles and interests makes it easier to spot conflicts early and manage them transparently.
So thank you all for completing that poll. I'm just looking at the results show that, yep, 88% of you have a conflict of interest policy and 53% a register for those conflicts. It's important to have a policy guide to let you manage conflicts of interest should they arise in your organization, and possibly have this as a standing item on your agenda and minutes for boards. Conflict of interest procedures are important for protecting your organization's integrity and public trust. So examples of how conflict of interest could potentially arise could be sort of financial conflicts. The examples would be remuneration where trustee is paid for services provided to the charity, contracts where the charity enters a contract with the trustee's business or connected person, or grants and investments where a trustee or connected person receives a grant or has a personal financial interest in charity investments. And then you have non-financial conflicts. These could happen where there's maybe a dual role and the trustee holds a senior position in a partner or competing organization. Decisions benefit a trustee's family members or close friends, or personal beliefs which may influence the charity decisions. So you'll notice on those slides that there's several references to connected persons. And the legal definition under the Charities Act, NI 2008, is crucial for understanding the conflicts of interest that may arise within charities and their trustees. Examples of connected persons may include a charity trustee, a person who is the donor of any land to the charity, a child, parent, grandchild, grandparent, brother, sister, spouse, or a civil partner, an officer, agent, or employee of the charity, the spouse or civil partner of any person mentioned above, the person carrying on business in partnership with anyone mentioned above, or an institution controlled by any person mentioned above. So identify, understand, and manage conflicts of interests and loyalty, both within the board and across the organization. Organizations need to show that they're identifying and dealing with potential conflicts of interest. So to help you, there's a guide on the DIY committee guide site. In particular, if you go to the NICFA hyperlink, you can download NICFA's guidance note on conflict of interest. And this link also includes a template policy and register of interest. So for any of the group who had indicated in the poll that they didn't have one, you can find the guide in here, a template policy guide. The template policy also includes a definition of connected person, which is essential in managing those conflicts of interest effectively. And now I'm going to hand you back to Connor for the next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. So we're going to talk through the highlighted questions here and give some examples of how my organisation, Community Arts Partnership, like other government-funded organisations, are required to gather information around these areas. So reasonable steps should be taken to reflect best practice. Again, here, the governance health check can hopefully help you. If your organisation is in receipt of public or statutory funding, or if you're seeking more support from trusts and foundations, understanding the equality, diversity, inclusion, and good relations of your organisation may be key. All charitable organisations should respect and promote these values through appropriate policies. This means monitoring governance to understand and develop diverse board membership, through looking at gender, age, sexuality, disability, political or religious background, race, nationality, and so on. Promote and ensure inclusive recruitment and bias-free discussions and appointments. In terms of staff, looking at equal opportunities in recruitment, promotion, training, protection from discrimination, bullying, or harassment. In terms of services, removing barriers to access, like languages, interpreters, disability access, training, inclusive activities, community outreach, mental health, or other diversity and inclusion policies. The goal in all this, of course, is to embed fairness, openness, accessibility across all the structures of your organisation, from governance, staffing, and services. So here you can see the EDI and the link through to the DIY committee guide. So my organisation already has much of this embedded in its DNA. Champion cultural democracy and access, participation, authorship, ownership are key tenets of our practice. So the key is to make systemic and visible through policies, through training, through recruitment, monitoring, and advocacy, that we show our values and that we're committed to those. So your board may look to promote EDI through open recruitment, diverse membership, ensuring inclusive decision-making, looking at your staff and freelancers, promoting equal opportunities, fair pay, training in awareness and inclusion, and a safe working culture. In terms of your programming, you may be looking at more accessible venues, multilingual materials perhaps, inclusive and tailored workshop programs, co-designed with your participants perhaps too. And in terms of partnerships, working with minorities, people with disability, youth groups, cross-community and cross-border linkage perhaps too. And all this needs monitored. And so you need to gather feedback. You need to track that engagement and indeed review your EDI through a working group if you possibly have the capacity to do so. So EDI is wider than Section 75. So it really looks at, are there gaps in your diversity and equality and inclusion? So who's not at the table? We need that. We need to discuss that because it's important to have a diversity of voices. So you have to think about widening out your program. You have to think about how you gather data around that. And your board should try to be reflective of the service users and reflective of the communities that you serve as well. So outlined in the guidance, in the DIY guide, really should help you think about EDI in your own organizations. Every organization should be striving to actively embed equality, diversity, and inclusion, and good relations in its governance, staffing, culture, and services. And it means having robust policies, single or multiple, to help guide you, to help with your governance, to help with your staff and volunteers, and indeed to promote service delivery, good relations, and to challenge some of the age-old problems that we encounter in community here in Northern Ireland too. And for those who want template policy on EDI, they can download it from the same webpage on the DIY guide. Back to Marie.
Thank you, Conor. And just for the next few slides today, we'll return to the governance health check and concentrate on the highlighted area of safeguarding responsibilities. So the question is, does the board ensure that the organisation complies with its safeguarding responsibilities? Some suggested areas of evidence for your organisation in this sector could be, in this section, could be your latest reviewed safeguarding policy guide. This maybe also could have a breakdown of training staff and volunteers have attended around safeguarding requirements. Perhaps you do access and eye checks if they're relevant. As with all policy and procedure, it's important that the safeguarding policy and procedures communicated effectively with staff and volunteers. So maybe think, do you have a process for that? Do you know who's responsible for reporting? Is there a procedure for people within the organisation to follow if a safeguarding issue arises? Again, on the DIY committee guide, you will find information, guidance, and on understanding complying with safeguarding responsibilities. In this section of the guide, you'll find the key pieces of legislation relating to safeguarding children, young people, and adults at risk. And all of these can be accessed through the hyperlinks, www.legislation.gov.uk. There's further guidance here from Volunteer Now. So you can see on the screen that these are all hyperlinks. So each of these can be downloaded for your benefit. The DIY Committee Guide also has hyperlinks to additional guidance from Volunteer Now. So you'll see here hyperlinks to the Keeping Children Safe guide, which outlines principles and good practice of child protection. You'll also find practical resources here like sample forms. Then you have the Keeping Adults Safe Standards and Guidance for Good Practice in Safeguarding Vulnerable Adults, and the Education and Training Guidance for Youth Organisations. For my last slide today, we'll jump back to the Governance Health Check document to take a look at safe culture. This was a new addition to the Code of Good Governance in recognition of the importance of making people feel safe in your organisation. But it reaches much further than that. It can be linked to safeguarding responsibilities as well. Looking at the suggested evidence in this, maybe you have an anti-bullying and harassment policy, a whistleblowing policy, perhaps dignity at work, a code of conduct, staff satisfaction surveys, regular supervision and support for all staff and volunteers, and your equality, diversity and inclusion policy and training. So for example, your dignity at work policy might typically contain guidance for staff and volunteers on equality of opportunity, staff responsibilities and conduct, definitions of harassment and bullying, and managing others and relationships. So if you don't have a dignity at work policy already, you can see an example on the NICFA website. Down below that, you'll see an actions table, and this is where your organisation includes all their proposed actions in that area where they're maybe partially met or not met. It's probably a good idea to include who is going to do the action and put a time limit for completing these to make sure it doesn't get dropped and that the action's taken. So that's all for me today. So thank you for taking the time to listen and participate, and I'll pass you over to Denise.
Thank you very much, Marie and Connor, for that great canter through Principle 4 of the Code of Good Governance, showing you how you can use the complementary resources of the Governance Health Check and the DIY Committee Guide to help you understand further about adhering to the Governance Health Check. And as Marie and Connor have already said, the purpose of the Governance Health Check is to keep it very practical for you, to give you practical tools to help you to bring actions and going forward then for yourselves then is to think about, are there any immediate obstacles that you have that would prevent you or a barrier to you in taking this forward? Maybe you're thinking your committee maybe aren't interested, maybe you've tried before, but we would suggest to you to go to your next committee or board meeting and tell everyone that you were at this training and that you would like to have a discussion around how you can review your governance. And this is a really useful first step. And of course, we are going to have recordings of all 5 of the Governance Health Check webinars available to you. So you can dish one out to each member maybe of the committee or board going forward. So thank you very much and goodbye.